Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to see everyone this morning. Does the mic seem a little hot? It's okay. It's good. So I returned from a trip to rural Vermont on Thursday night, close to midnight, I think, when you picked me up. Was it close to midnight? So if my eyes close and I'm not talking, I may be thinking of something very profound, or I might be sleeping, as possible. I went to Vermont very suddenly to help at Shao Shan Temple after the sudden death of the abbot there, Taihaku Nichiren, who I feel very fortunate to count as a close friend and colleague in the Dharma. And when I say the sudden death of, it strikes me as a funny phrase, because really all death is sudden. Don't really ease our way into that. But sometimes we get some warning. And in this case, Taihaku, one of the most vibrant people that I know, that she would just kind of suddenly decide that it was time to go somewhere else, was shocking. And so I'd like to talk this morning a little bit about Taihaku's central Dharma teaching, which I had a chance to spend about 10 days with her Dharma heir and her successor there at Shao Shan, whose name is Kenzan. Wonderful man. He's visited Buddha I think just one time. It was a number of years ago, maybe 5 years ago or so. Some of you may remember him. He also trained with Gensei early on. For those of you who knew Gensei, they did a training period together down outside of Los Angeles. But first I just wanted to say a few things about Taihaku. One of the things that drew us close as friends is that she was a real mystic. There aren't that many of us in modern Western Buddhism. Things have gotten quite rational. And for those of us who are inclined towards a more mystical path, sometimes it's a little bit lonely. And Taihaku and I, right from when we first met, we could see that in each other, and it was a great support to have each other in that kind of approach to the Dharma. She grew up in Marblehead, Massachusetts, just north of Boston, and she loved to sail, which was another thing that we would talk about. I was buying a little sailboat because I had been sailing a couple times when I was in my 20s, and I thought, oh, this would be a good hobby. I could just go up to the lakes and float around, and so I had bought the small sailboat. And she was just laughing at me because I had I had this idea that how easy it was going to be, And she was like, "No, it's not like that. You're going to get wet. You're gonna." But she sailed on the ocean, which I don't do, and so it's a little bit different thing. I had a dream there while staying at Shao Shan after her passing. It was the night after her cremation. I was standing on the beach, and there were massive waves, but they weren't breaking. They were just like swells in the ocean, like way beyond what they would normally be. Maybe if you're way out to sea in a storm, there are big swells like that, but it was right up to the shoreline. And there was a sailboat with a massive white sail. It was so big, and I wanted to go out into the ocean, but it wasn't time yet. So I held on to the corner of the sail, and it filled with wind, and I could feel the tug. Anyway, there's more to the dream, but when I woke up, I was reflecting on Taihaku. Her name refers to the North Star, or the Star of Awakening, but the characters themselves mean something like great whiteness. So I have this image of her being this massive sail, catching the wind of the world and using it, employing it to further the Buddha Dharma and to cultivate a world of real care. She was this rare kind of person who went into deep spiritual practice early in her life. After high school, she went to live with someone named Nina Gitani, who was a devotee of a famous teacher named Kirpal Singh, a Sikh man. We know Sikhs in this area, the order of the Western Sikhs. Yogi Bhajan was the guru of that community, but there are many teachers that come out of the Sikh tradition, and Kirpal Singh was one of those. And she was Nina, as Taihaku would always refer to her, was a deep devotee. And she had a small ashram there that's very close to where Shao Shan Temple is now. That's how Taihaku ended up there in rural Vermont. And so she went to live there when she was 18. And she said that this ashram, the thing about it was very strict, that they were celibate, they ate very simple vegetarian food, and they weren't allowed to speak hardly at all. It was a very silent place. And so she said this ashram was kind of like the detox center for the crazy ashrams that were around in the 70s. So people would go and they would kind of burn out on their whatever kind of crazy spiritual trip, and then they would end up here at Nina's place to kind of like kind of calm down, and a beautiful place. When I went to visit Shao Shan a few years ago, I was deeply impacted by that place. She said that Nina was like an incredibly ethereal person, and being an ethereal person, she was always looking for a cave. She wanted to practice in a cave. And she said for the years she was there like 7 years, she said Nina was always walking around in the forest with her walking stick, looking for some cave, which she never found a full cave, but they did find a place which was a crag into the rocks, and so her students built a cave for her. And you can go sit there in that cave now. It's quite beautiful. They built a stove into the side of the rock with a big iron door. So the first time I went was in the late fall. It was pretty cold. And they keep a fire going, and the rocks in the side of the cave just warm up. It was very dark, very clean, wonderful womb of the earth. And so, if you can imagine what it'd be like to get out of high school and then go live in that kind of place, for 7 years, that was her introduction into adulthood. Oh, she said something else really funny. She said, if there were too many people starting to gather around, they would just make the food even more simple. They would just reduce it to brown rice and miso soup. And then people would start leaving after a few days. They couldn't deal with it. And so that was their population control, was just to make the food less appealing. And then they would go. But while she was there, she met a man who she ended up marrying, who was a scholar of Japanese Buddhism, and they traveled to Japan together. She was married to this man whose name I'm not remembering right now. Top of my head, I forgot to put in my notes. They were married by Suzuki Roshi, the famous founder of San Francisco Zen Center. Their marriage ceremony was performed by him, and they went to live in Japan for a period of time. And she before that, they had bought this land in rural Vermont, where Shao Shan Temple is now. And she returned there, and they had 2 children, and their relationship dissolved, but she raised her 2 kids up there. If any of you have been into rural Vermont, It's very beautiful, stunningly beautiful, super dense forest, really cold. And so she had this little converted garage that she lived in with a wood stove, no electricity, no running water, and she raised her children there by herself, until they were in their teens. And her son said that's when they built the house. He said he didn't know a flush toilet till he was at home, until he was like a junior in high school or something like that. And still now, if you visit Shao Shan, there's this wonderful, what do we call them out here now? Composting toilets. People into these composting toilets. Well, these are just like outhouses, but they're really nice outhouses. Anyway, if you're not there, if you're there in the middle of a Vermont winter, maybe they're not so nice. I got the wind blowing up. The inside probably is a little bit cold. But she was just there, so present, so vibrant. And so she lived on that land for many years. She was a deep devotee of the Lotus Sutra. Another reason that our hearts connected so deeply. She was involved in a school of Buddhism that's referred to as the Nipponzan, a school of Nichiren Buddhism. Nichiren was a great teacher in Japan, a great Buddhist teacher who focused on the Lotus Sutra and the veneration of the Lotus Sutra. You may have heard the chant Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. That chant is, that mantra is said over and over and over by the devotees that follow in the lineages of Nichiren. And she practiced that for many, many years, and eventually became a Soto Zen monk and trained under Tanaka Shinkai Roshi, one of the great teachers of the past several decades in Japan, who was the abbot of Hokkyoji Monastery, which is behind Eiheiji. Eiheiji is a head monastery of one of the head monasteries of the Soto school. And Dogen Zenji, the founder of our school in Japan and the founder of Eiheiji, he had a student named Jakuen who had come to study with him from China. And he spent some time at Eiheiji, and then later on he left Eiheiji and he established Hokkyoji that was even further up in the mountains. And it's said that he just sat there for many, many years by himself. Maybe he had a little hut, and he had a friend who was a cow and a friend that was a dog. And they were just there for a long time until a lord, whose name I can't remember now, happened to find out about him and was impressed by him and said, "Oh, I'll build this temple." That's oftentimes how a temple would get built. And so Hokkyoji was constructed at that time. Tanaka Shinkai Roshi taught there for many years and had many disciples. Taihaku was one of them. She said the training there was incredibly difficult. Incredibly difficult. And she would have been doing that training in her late 50s and early 60s. Most of her fellow trainees were maybe in their mid-20s or early 30s. But she was tough and super vibrant. She had told me that when she first went to that land where Shao Shan is, she was driving around with her husband at the time, and they were looking for a place to buy land, and they just happened upon this sign that had been put up just a couple hours before about this plot of land that was for sale, and they drove up onto the land, and she said when she got out of the car and her feet touched the ground, it was as if lightning shot through her body. And she said, "Oh, we'll call it Shao Shan." She didn't know what that meant, She just said, it must be called Shao Shan. And years later, when they were establishing the temple that's there now, that's a Soto Zen temple, her Dharma brother and her looked through the dictionaries to see if they could find good characters to match the sound. Because she had decided on the sound. She just knew that's what she wanted to call it, and then they had to find the characters. And so they found the characters. The first character, Shao, is a Chinese pronunciation of the character. It means the heart of birthing the sun. That's what the individual characters within it mean. It's a very obscure way to refer to enlightenment. It's a character. It's a very obscure character that refers to awakening. Right? The heart of birthing the sun. so matched her. And Shan means mountain. So that mountain is the mountain of the heart that births the sun. So when I got the message 2 weeks ago tomorrow that she had passed away in her sleep of her heart failure, maybe more than most people I know, it was shocking to me. So vibrant, but also thoroughly practical, grounded, energetically engaged. These were the qualities of Taihaku. So many people who are mystical, they're like floating off, they can't get anything done, right? It's off into like mystic land. But the great power of the Soto school is to have the mystic heart and to be energetically engaged with the world, right? With the world that we can see. This world we can see is so enlivened by all of the worlds that we don't see with our physical eye, but move through us in a spiritual way. And that's how she lived. I asked Kenzan as we were preparing for the wake right after I arrived, I said, it's very common for a teacher to leave a verse of their teaching. It's a death verse. Really, a monk is supposed to write a death verse every year. So in case you die during that year, that there will be a verse that is there, left for you. I did that for a bunch of years, and then I stopped, and I'm thinking I better start now. I had a lot of reflections on this trip, a little bit like, I better get some life insurance. A lot of mortality encounters. But I asked, did she have a verse somewhere? Do you know if she kept a verse somewhere? And he said, no, I'm pretty sure she didn't have a verse. And I said, well, we still need something. We need something to be able to write down and to show people, what is the quality of her teaching? Over the past years, what's the thing that she comes back to again and again and again and again and again? Could you put it into words? And Kenzan said, that's easy. He said, she just keeps encouraging us to make our caring bigger. He said that when they would be studying some sutras, particularly sutras that would focus on relinquishment, that would focus on non-attachment, and they would be reading something in these sutras about how we shouldn't be attached to things, and they'd be in a study group and they'd be talking along, and she'd get a little quiet, and she would say, I just don't see it that way. It's so dry to think about non-attachment as being about getting away from things. She said, non-attachment isn't about getting away from things. It's about making your caring bigger. That's what you have to do. When you think that you possess something, that's attachment. And eventually you will kill the thing through owning it, through apprehending it, through limiting it because of your grasp. But if we really care for something, then that caring can become a gateway. It becomes an extension of the life of that thing. It becomes an awareness that we don't know the edge of what we care about. We can't grasp it. We can't control it. We can't confine it. If we care for it, everything is a doorway into what is beyond the face that you see, beyond just the thing that you have this inclination to attach to or to grasp to. At her funeral afterwards, Kenzan was saying a few words, and he said, he was talking about making your caring bigger, and he said, so really, all you have to do is care about two things. Care about Taihaku, and then care about everything she cared about. And then that will be everything. Right? That's the Buddha way. Make your caring bigger. So deceptively simple. But if you pay attention to this phrase, it unlocks something deeply important. Now, if we study Buddha Dharma, we learn very quickly that attachment, grasping, clinging, these are the foundational attitudes or the foundational postures of suffering. This is core to the Buddhist teaching. Right? Attachment is the foundational attitude of suffering. When we cling to things, we become anxious. When we cling to things, our life becomes unstable. It's just the opposite of what we think. We thought if I could just hold on to the things that are most important, that then my life would be stable. But actually, as I take up the project of owning things, of controlling them, of keeping things away and keeping things close and setting up my whole system, I become more and more anxious of when this will no longer work. And we know that it will not work forever, whatever system it is that I set up. This is foundational to Buddhist teachings. But it's very easy for us to then understand this teaching as asking us to crush attachment. Right? So if grasping things, if attaching to things, if clinging to things brings about suffering, then I will destroy the clinging. And so we think of Buddhist practice as being something about destroying the clinging. And you hear people say this kind of thing all the time. They say, oh, you just have to let it go. If anyone ever says that to you, take your fingers and put them like this and just go like that towards this part of their face. Poke them in the eye. That's my recommendation. Or if you want to be nice, just yank their nose. You just have to let it go. What kind of life is that? The things you care about, just letting them go? That's like suicide. You see, when we understand the Buddha Dharma in that way, we're not detaching. We're not practicing detachment. What we're doing is we're attaching to a feeling of non-attachment. We're attaching to an idea of non-attachment. We've come up with the idea that if I was just not attached, there wouldn't be any problems. If you didn't care about anything, no problems. And there's a certain amount of freedom that comes with that. It's a very lonely and painful freedom. But there's a certain kind of freedom, and when we grab onto that, then it's like, chill out, dude. Don't worry about it. But that kind of attachment is actually much more dangerous than the simple attachment of just caring about things and wanting them to stay healthy. So the practice of non-attachment is not to attach to a feeling of non-attachment or an idea of non-attachment or the project of trying to get rid of things that we care about so that our life will be easier. If we really take up a practice of relinquishment, if we really take up the practice of non-attachment, that is a practice of attention. It's a practice of awareness. When you encounter another being, if you push them away, that is a kind of attachment. Probably attachment to yourself. If you just disregard them, it's because you're holding on to something. But if you just hold on to them and try to keep them the way you think they're supposed to be or the way that they are, that's also just attachment. But there's another possibility. We call it awareness. What if you were just willing to meet that being? Just meet them. Don't insist on them staying the same. Moment after moment after moment, as a being changes, as a being shows all these different parts of themselves. Could you keep watching? Could you keep meeting? Could you keep paying attention? So that's the practice of non-attachment. It's not a rejection or a holding still, but a continual practice of awareness. It's very popular for us to talk about mindfulness. which is a wonderful practice. And it has implications beyond the cultivation of a certain kind of mind state, which is the way oftentimes people will take it. Like if you're mindful a little bit and you can do some mental hygiene, which is great. But the reason that mental hygiene really works is because you're caring. Right? It's not that you get to cling to a particular state of kind of mental cleanliness. But whatever that mental cleanliness is a practice. It's an activity of paying attention, of being aware, and continuing to encounter. Within the Buddha Dharma, we talk about wisdom and compassion. And that's what I love about this teaching of Taihaku's. Make your caring bigger, is that it's, when I say that it's deceptively simple, I say that because it invites us into the practice which is completely ungraspable. In kind of technical terms or in classical Buddhist teaching, we call this the practice of wisdom and compassion, that we don't get one without the other. Wisdom is seeing with the whole eye. It's seeing with the eye of wholeness, or seeing with the non-dual eye. It calls into question the things that we grasp onto and think that we know. The eye of wisdom is always asking us to go beyond, right? To see through. But that eye of wisdom becomes unbalanced when we think that it can dismiss beings. When going beyond means leaving behind. We've started to misunderstand what the wisdom eye is inviting us into. The wisdom eye does not disregard beings, does not disregard things. Individual things in their total partialness, and in my total partialness, right, are invitations. They're not to be dismissed. It's not that the wisdom eye sees through things. I mean, I said that just a few minutes ago, to see through things. But the seeing through things is not like the thing is unimportant and it just sees past it because this thing that I see is unimportant. To see through means to meet the partialness of a thing, the partialness of a person, of a situation. When I mean partialness there is that it has a limited form. It comes about by causes and conditions. And my seeing of it also comes apart by causes and conditions. All of that is an invitation. All of that is a wholeness. Right? And it's a wholeness as it calls awareness out of us. It asks us to stay present and to attune to the aliveness rather than the way that I want it to be. That seeing is itself the touching with an open hand that we call compassion. The touching with an open heart that we call compassion. So when you care about something, really care about it. When you really care about it, it will invite you into a bigger world. A bigger world where that individual thing doesn't get in the way of the caring for everything that is not that thing. To pull this out of some abstraction, those of you who have been blessed to have children, this is a place that you can really see it very clearly. You know you love your child. It's so easy to cling to them and try to make them what you think they are or what they should be. But actually they're an invitation to loving deeply that invites you into loving all children, not just your child. If you're going to make your child into your whole world, into everything, you won't be able to love other children. You have to appreciate their total partialness, even their defects. Hard to imagine they could have any, right? It goes the other direction if you think about, all of us have parents. Some of us know them, some of us don't. It goes that direction too. And people in our community, perhaps the spinach in your garden. That was something that Taihaku loved. She loved to grow food, a big garden. And when I talked to her on the Zoom or on the phone or whatever, I'd say, "Oh, did you get your vegetables in yet?" And she'd say, "Oh, I have this and I have this and I have the fava beans are coming up. We took those down and now this is going in and now this is going in." And she, Kenzan said she would always say, "Oh, my babies are thirsty. My babies are thirsty. I have to get out to the garden and water my babies." I asked Kenzan, I said, do you have a good habit of eating well? Because I'm worried about him. I mean, he was on that mountain with her for 15 years. Now he's there by himself. And I said, "Do you have a habit of eating well? You do that?" And he said, "I don't know. I just ate what she fed me." Because that's how she lived. One of the things I feel is the most, or significance of this teaching that is so important, and I see this reflected in Taihaku's life so fully, is we oftentimes think to take up a spiritual life is to change many things in our life. And actually, things in our life will change. We don't have to be on a spiritual path for that to happen. That just happens. That was what it means to be alive, is that things are changing. So we can shift our perspective a little bit. That this Buddhist teaching is not so much trying to teach us how to change our life, not changing the contents of our life, but encouraging us to regard the contents of our life as a gateway to the spiritual life. See? To care for the things that are there in your life and to let them be the gateway to a deeper and richer way of living. I think we need that more than ever, because we have so much power and resource now that we can spend a whole life just remodeling our life. Oh, change the carpet and everything will be better. Oh, no. Put a wall here. No, maybe if I had 2 bathrooms, everything would be good. I'm speaking literally here, of course, but metaphorically. Like, even if you don't do that to your house all the time, you're doing that to your life constantly, right? Oh, I just changed this a little bit. Just remodel this. Just remodel that. Remodel this. Remodel that. And then everything will be fine. This is the definition of attachment, right? That this teaching of relinquishment, of openness, is asking us to leave that, to let that part of us rest a bit, and then to pay attention to what's there, and the ways in which it changes, and that needs our awareness to come into the fullness of living. In that way, the contents of your life become a gateway to caring. And it was so evident in the way that Taihaku lived this time around. And I hope that many of you will have a chance in the future to visit her mountain in Vermont, and you will see it shining brightly in the community there and in the it's like opposite of Buddha Eye. Is like this little teeny temple in like 100 acres out in the woods. It takes half hour to get to any town or whatever, you know. So I mean, opposite in that way. Like we're right in the middle of a residential area. I think that's all I have to say. There's a little time for questions or comments if anyone has some.
Thank you.
Hi.
I'm so happy that you brought the issue of love to this conversation, because I find it supremely confusing. You know, that how do you work with love and non-attachment? I had a yoga teacher who said something. She said, "Be wary of the message to love yourself," and everyone gasped because it's like, you know, we get this message a lot, you know, love yourself, self-care, love yourself. And I think she explained a bit more that when you become kind of drunk on loving yourself, or when you drink that a lot, you sometimes get upset when there are days you are not so happy with yourself, or that there's disappointment. And so I want to turn that lens a little bit, you know, much of your descriptions were about, you know, the self and another, yourself and a child, yourself and your community. Can you talk a little bit more about this issue of loving yourself and non-attachment?
Yeah, thank you. It's so interesting that you brought that up. I was just ranting yesterday. Azusa, my wife, and I we often go for a walk in the woods on a Saturday, and we were going up, and I turned the radio on, and there was just another song about like, you're perfect the way you are. You know? And I was just like, what does this do to the psyche of a people to hear that over and over and over and over and because obviously you're not perfect. Like, I mean, I think that's obvious. I don't know about all of you. And I get the message, you know, it has its place, and there's a beauty to it because we have so much self-criticism and whatever, but then this constant refrain of, oh, you're perfect the way you are. It's like, what happens when I feel really crappy? Is that perfect? You know, how am I supposed to work with that? So anyway, thank you for thank you for bringing that up. But the question here is interesting. In Chinese, the character for grasping or attachment is the character for love. And so it's not by mistake that that when we read the teaching, we oftentimes get the feeling like Buddhism is telling us, like, stop that kind of loving. That's the orthodox Buddhism. And I don't want to speak against that. That actually unhooking ourselves from the ways that we think about love being like the one true thing and everything else pales in comparison to the love, I think is really a deep trap, especially when we turn it on ourselves. That the love I'm talking about here is awareness. It's a love that doesn't say everything is perfect, and it's a love that doesn't say that things are always the same, but it's an attitude of caring in which we don't insist upon something being the way that we want it to, or the way that we remembered it being, or the way we think it's supposed to, moment after moment. And that is a practice of awareness and a practice of care. So with ourself, we can see that, you know, there's a good test for you. How good are you at being grumpy? You know, I think that's a good thing for it. some people don't get grumpy very often, and some people get grumpy all the time. So I'm not saying it's better to be one or the other, but I'm saying when you do get grumpy, what do you do with it? Like, do you say, oh, I'm perfect, and so I have a right to be grumpy, like, right? And then you're just mean to people or whatever. That doesn't seem quite right. And then, but the other one is like, oh, I'm perfect, so I shouldn't be grumpy. Then it's like, oh, I'm undercutting my own experience or my own heart, and we just go to some kind of abstract place. What would it be to simply be grumpy? To experience the unsettledness of our own heart and the prickliness when things go a certain way or someone says something a certain way, etc. Can I feel that actually? When I can't feel it, when I can't pay attention to it, it will control me. But when I can pay attention to it, when I can be present with it, now there is a caring that can be unfolded. That kind of love is really different than just trying to keep something the same way, adoring. So in that way, I think we can reform the word love a little bit. It's really a verb. It's something we do, not something that we have, or even something that we feel. I think when we say I feel love, I think really what we're doing is we're feeling the after effects of the activity of loving, and that's wonderful. If we don't do that, if we don't actually risk attachment in that conventional sense, like really caring about another person. If we don't risk that, we can't really find the deep heart of Buddhist teaching. It just goes cold. And so that person shouldn't just be a person out there. It should be this person here. Anyway, I don't know if I responded to your question there.
Thank you.
Hi.
It's really profound, I think, what you're saying and conveying today, and it sounds to me like the attention that you're talking about that we place on this between pushing away and grasping, or how we can, conceive those things, is that attention to the vibrancy is like showing up, right? Because we don't always know what to do with that, and how to take a step from there, how to take a bite of that piece of fruit, and how to, and that's so profoundly hard. I mean, we show up, and I find that I lots of times just sit there with it, and maybe there's something from that place of paying attention to the vibrancy that informs me, well, this is something I could say, or something I could do, or some kind of step I could take, back off, move in, be bolder, be more hesitant, give more space to a situation. Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, as you're speaking, one of the things that's coming to my mind is this kind of caring can bring us to the place where we don't know what to do.
Yeah.
What a gift. Like to come to the place where you don't know what to do. That's where a true stepping can happen. Now, it doesn't mean that we become a bumbling, kind of, I don't know what to do, so whatever I do, it'll just have to be what it is. I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm saying that actually the most precise, probably the most expert action that can be taken as one where we pass through that gateway of not knowing what to do. If you pay attention to people who really know how to do something, you'll see that in what they're doing. You know, I'm thinking about cutting joints in wood with Kogen out at Seido's farm a couple decades ago, 15 years ago, something like that. And I remember we were cutting these joints, and to me it's a piece of wood, right? And it's like, okay, how do you cut the joint? And we're getting down into the joint cutting a little bit, and Kogen takes out his, what do you call those big razor sharp things you have that look like chisels? Slicks, yeah. And he's like, takes his pencil and he says, see, it's a little high here, it's a little here. He says, oh, there's a knot here, watch out for that knot. You're not going to be able to cut through that quite right. You know? So for how many years, you know, Kogen's cultivated that deep wisdom of the craft of woodworking. So you have to come to not know, because you have to pay attention to the wood. So even someone who's super skilled in that way, it's not that they get really good at writing roughshod over top of whatever's there. They learn to enter through the gateway of not knowing and then responding to what's there. I found that true as a school teacher. You know, when you first begin teaching school, you're just trying to make it function, right? And you have all these ideas and you have all these stupid systems, you know, like, oh, gold stars, you know. And it kind of works, but I never used gold stars. I use other things, but and so you use these techniques. You have to actually, because you don't know, and so you're getting closer and closer. But if you watch a master teacher at their craft, what you'll see is at the beginning of a class, they're shaking off everything they know, and then they're encountering their students. And depending on the way that student looks, like in the oh, good morning. How did they move? What was their breathing like? Are they carrying a cola? You know, like, are they just drinking a Coke for breakfast? What do their eyes look like? You know?
But is that we're like maybe taking refuge in some of the training in the paramitas, some of just the in generosity and patience and in the just like the skills of a woodworker, the skills of a teacher.
Yeah.
You know, and just trusting that.
Yeah.
And going with the fall, you know.
Yeah. So this is the beautiful thing. You won't know what to do, right? If you pay attention, if you care for things, it will take you to the place where you don't know what to do. And the second great thing is you will screw up. And in that screwing up, you will find something out about what is the skillful stepping. But if you don't try to step skillfully, if you don't try to enact the generosity, if you don't try to enact all of those qualities of the bodhisattva, then the messing up will just be being kind of lost in the shuffle. But when you make that intention to wake up, then all of the mistakes become your teacher. In fact, all of the mistakes are part of your awareness. They're part of the way that you're paying attention, and you know, it's not so complicated. It's just actually a lot. It takes a lot of bravery to be willing to go there again and again. Mm-hmm. And what you were saying about how scary that is, that's why we have meditation. Meditation, people, when we practice meditation, we can think about it or regard it in a lot of different ways. I think one very useful way to regard it is it's like a prayer. It's like a prayer that I will have the wisdom and compassion to meet the world the way that I hope I can be. And that's what we're doing in meditation, is praying for that. And we're praying with our whole body. We're praying with our whole heart and with our whole mind. And the only way to really do that then is to do that thing, to love in the way, to care in the way that I'm talking about here. Right? Our own body, our own mind. And then as we walk, we're more, and hopefully we have more capacity then to walk into that scary place. Yeah, be bold. Yeah. Mm.